Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
This is a picture of myself and my son, and a picture of the Edry in the background.
In the summer of 1958, Howard Ulrich was a commercial fisherman from Pelican, following feeding birds and word that the fish were biting near Lituya Bay.
We came in there somewhere around 6 or 7 o'clock at night and had made dinner and anchored up and went to bed. In fact, I was asleep, and then that earthquake started, so that woke me up. I saw the splash. Something I was looking off at the shoreline, and something out of the corner of my eye caught my attention, and it turned out to be this big splash. Okay, then the splash, you see that big horrible splash, and it looks like, you know, like Bikini, where they set off the atomic bomb, you know. But then as the water is falling back down, you know, into the bay, out of the bottom of that came this big wave. And that wave was actually, we figure, it was about 800 feet high.
So you, Howard, were right here.
Right.
And you saw the debris fly up in this far end near the head of Lituya Bay.
Right.
The wave then moved across, was 800 feet high out in this area, you figure.
Ulrich estimates the original 1,720-foot wave had dropped to about 150 feet by the time it reached them.
We're actually looking down in the trees, and I'm pretty sure we were over the land at that time, and still, you know, pushing that old Chrysler Crown to get us up over the top of that wave. And then, of course, the water coming back down off of the land gave us another push out, helped us out, actually. So everything worked out about as good as it could.
Ulrich says his son's only memory of the wave is the fear on his father's face.
I just felt another small tremor, so I better try and get the heck out of here right away, I guess.
By now, the water was churning with smaller waves filled with giant trees and ice chunks. Ulrich worried they'd cut off his escape route.
There's a big bunch of junk closing in behind me here, so I'm going to have to go out. It's just solid. It's just like it's growing. The whole thing came off, of course, brush and everything. It's just solid behind me, and when it comes out, it's going to block the whole entrance. So I guess I better get the hell out of here.
Howard and Sonny were the lucky ones. The Badger was tossed over the spit near the bay's entrance and swamped. Bill and Vi Swanson were rescued, but Bill died in Lituya Bay only a few years later on his one and only return trip. The Wagners and the Sunmore just disappeared.
God, what an awful sight. You ought to see it in there. It's like the end of the world.
Did you think you were going to make it, or did you even have a
No,
thought
I
like
didn't
that?
think it just surprised me when, when we got to the top of the wave. The thing that saved us, of course, is the wave didn't break. It was just a big round wave and just a big swell. And boats are made to handle big swells.
Despite his wild ride, Ulrich has no fear of the water. He's retired now in the picturesque coastal community of Sitka. There have been at least 9 major earthquakes along the Fairweather Fault in Lituya Bay since 1899, yet life always finds a way to return. Though major waves had struck Lituya Bay about once every 25 years since 1899, it's now been almost half a century since the largest tsunami ever recorded.
I've had the geologist who flew up there the day after this happened, and he said that the whole top of that ridge is fractured. He said it's going to happen again and again and again.
What we do know is that the land that is between that fault line and the ocean has not yet docked or held on solidly. So geologists and glaciologists say that that land is moving northward more quickly than on the continental plate. And so we assume that there will be more earthquakes. Will they happen in Lituya Bay? Will Lituya Bay send another tsunami wave out? No one knows for sure. But I think that anytime anyone enters the bay, they think about those legends and they wonder if it'll happen again.
Apologies for the silent theater treatment there for just a few minutes. Everything's working well, and we have both parts of television active now. Here we go. Your hazardous weather across the North Slope. Once again, the North Slope, the Arctic coast, is dealing with wind and snow. Most of the falling snow will be across the northeastern coastal plain north of the Brooks Range there. The Arctic coast itself, from the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, are looking at blizzard warnings again through the evening to about 6 o'clock for areas around Prudhoe Bay and 9 o'clock a little bit further eastward. Conditions will continue to be blustery through the evening and overnight hours, but conditions will be their worst this evening. And again, probably a couple inches of snow across the northern plain off to the east. To the west, not a whole lot of snow and accumulation, but it looks like the winds will stay up. Now, if you're wondering, where's the rest of the snow for the central and the west and the south central areas, maybe even southeast, although it's been fairly wet for you, take a look at some of the winter temperatures that our climate experts have put together here. For Barrow, this is the third warmest winter on record that we have, 7.9 degrees. 7.9 degrees below zero is the average temperature there. Kotzebue, 7.3 degrees, also the third warmest. Nome is somewhere on the order of 6th to 10th warmest. As you go a little bit further south, those areas actually warm up a little bit more. Homer had their all-time record high temperature in February. I want to say it was the 22nd at 53 degrees. Anchorage is also in the top 10. Kodiak, the warmest winter of record so far, 36.7 degrees. Cordova, 32.4 degrees on average, about the 4th or 5th average winter. And then for southeast, you can see Annette has just been a scorcher, second warmest winter on record. Juneau coming in somewhere between 4th and 5th. And St. Paul also looking at the third warmest winter with an average temperature of 30.7. Well, again, when you're looking at this and you average it out over time, a tenth of a degree, 2/10, 5/10, even a whole degree, it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you average that over an entire month, that has huge implications. And in some cases, that affects what you can do on the snow or no snow, and it affects things like race routes between, say, Anchorage, Willow, and Nome. So a lot is impacted by just small variations in those temperatures. And by our measure here, some places have had their warmest winter on record, including Kodiak, almost Homer, and many other locations across south central and southeast, and even a few pretty warm ones up north for Barrow and Kotzebue. So there you go. We found this on Facebook for you today from our National Weather Service Facebook page. You can find that anytime you like to get kind of the rest of the story by going to NWS Alaska. Here's a look at the weather picture as it's taking us into the first week of March. And southerly flow across the Bering Sea is warm, and across the west coast we will see periods of rain and snow across southwest. It's also going to help make more snow across the northwestern coast. All of this is feeding into a wind maker as well that's diving out of the Chukchi Sea and heading for the northwest. With that, we expect many areas across more parts of Alaska to get back to more wintertime cold. So there is more winter and more cold, especially on the way for many more parts of Alaska as we go into the next week or so. In the meantime, high pressure still has control across the eastern parts of the Gulf. We have our southerly flow working back over Kodiak Island, back into Prince William Sound, and you can see a boundary definitely right here crossing over the northwestern coast and the Seward Peninsula. This is just the first part of a system that's going to come racing across the interior. As it does so, it's pushing in more wind across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, and it's also setting up a situation that will probably see some actual falling snow on top of gusts that could be on the order of 40 to 50 miles per hour. So very poor visibility along the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. A little bit further inland, the visibility won't be quite as bad, but there may actually be some snow accumulation with that. And then a little bit further south, more and more cold than anything else, but there will be some opportunities for snow across the interior, once again including Fairbanks and Eagle, maybe as far east as Northway, but a lot of the snow probably will be falling from Fairbanks and north and west, and also across the northern coastal plain. Now, as far as the weather map itself goes, we saw a front today working into the central and western sections of Alaska. Along that, the pressure gradient a lot stronger for the northern coast. The pressure level down to 1001 around the central area of low pressure there. Out to the west, another circulation coming into the western Bering Sea at 987 millibars. Blowing and drifting snow for the northwest. Low pressure across the south central regions, allowing warmer air to lift northward, and along that boundary we're seeing some fog around Yakutat. Some patchy cloud cover across southeast from time to time today. Didn't see a whole lot of precipitation for you. Areas of light snow are falling from Ambler and Bettles southward into the Susitna Valley. As we go into tonight, look for continued areas of rain and snow across south central. There was rain falling in Anchorage very lightly as we walked into the studio this evening. Areas of light snow are possible around the Copper River Basin, and as the colder air continues to drop southward into the Yukon Valley, that frontal boundary is going to slow down, put on the brakes. As it does that, it may still focus some areas of light snow across that frontal boundary itself. The winds will continue to focus across the Arctic coast and out across the Bering. Our front continues to move eastward. It's running into a ridge of high pressure here across the west coast, and it's going to slow that down a little bit. Out across the central and eastern Aleutians, warmer air is making it just over the northern coastline and into the southern Bering Sea. And along that boundary, that could keep some rain and snow showers around the Pribilofs. Heading into Wednesday, that front moves a little bit eastward. We get into more of a colder and westerly flow. There's a pocket of snow behind that. Low pressure continues to huddle out here across the Gulf of Alaska. That should slosh rain back into southeastern Alaska. Snow showers for the Copper River Basin, and there might be some snow showers from time to time around the Anchorage area. Of course, we're right there on that line where we may also see that mix in with some rain from time to time. Across the Yukon Valley and into the Kuskokwim, there could be some light snow there, and still snow showers and blowing and drifting snow for the Arctic coast as we head into Wednesday. Going into Thursday now, high pressure is trying to set up across the northern Yukon. We still have a pretty tight pressure gradient across the north. That means more blowing snow out across the west. The next front's moving into the western Bering. This has another round of warmer air working in with it. We've got our ridge setting up across the central chain and areas of snow showers, mainly along the Bering Sea coast. Just to the south of that, maybe even into the eastern Aleutians, there could be rain mixed with snow there. Same goes for the Pribilofs. Across south central, we've got the same circulation really, just hovering out across Middleton Island, just south around Resurrection Bay. This will keep areas of kind of low clouds and rain and snow just sloshing right up against the Chugach and Kenai Mountains. With that, expect some light snow across the interior. And again, Fairbanks could still be looking at some minor accumulations there. Rain back in the forecast for southeastern Alaska heading toward the end of the week, and colder air continues to drop southward and cover up more parts of the state. With that, it was a fairly mild day for southeast, not as warm as some of the ones we saw last week, but lower to mid-40s were the rule. Around Haida Gwaii, temps were in the mid-40s. Ketchikan and Annette also in the upper 40s. Sitka was showing 43, 41 in Juneau. Haines and Skagway closer to 40 degrees, 39 in Yakutat, mid-30s for Prince William Sound, 40 in Cordova, just about 40 for Seward with Homer at 48 degrees. Kenai was 35, about the same here in Anchorage. A little bit further north up the valley, temperatures hovered in the mid-30s today. Talkeetna showed 37. Up around Healy, it was 37 degrees. Fort Greely was 30. Fairbanks showed 20, right on the button, and 26 in Eagle. Fort Yukon had 9 degrees, 1 in Arctic Village, 19 in AKwx Pass. The Arctic coast, mainly in the teens and 20s, where the air was moving a little bit more. You saw slightly warmer weather. Out across the west, the effects of the cold front were being seen from Wainwright southward. You saw temperatures cruise south from the teens into the single digits down toward Kivalina at 6, Kotzebue 17, 25 in Nome, 30 in Unalakleet. McGrath was also about 30 degrees. Galena was 26, with Grayling showing temperatures in the 20s and 30s today. 34 in Bethel. Nunivak Island was 27. Around Bristol Bay, temperatures were at or just below that 40-degree mark, with 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. The Pribilofs at or just below freezing today. Lower 40s for Kodiak Island. And central and western parts of the chain, you were at 40 degrees or just below. Now, overnight low temperatures will stay fairly mild for most of the Middle Tanana Valley, southwest into the Kuskokwim Valley, and into the Alaska Peninsula. Southeast, also looking at temperatures at or above freezing. South Central should also see temperatures fairly close to the freezing point tonight. Kodiak Island, you're looking at 37. North of the Yukon, though, already cold is showing up there with temperatures anywhere from 5 below to about 5 above. Fort Yukon may hover near 9. The Arctic coast will start to get cold and quick. Look for temps from 10 below to maybe as cold as 15 below. And look at the cold spreading southward tomorrow. Many areas from the Brooks Range all the way down to Norton Sound will start to see your temperatures fall off from where they were today. Look for temps around Barrow to go to 6 below, 8 above in Shishmaref, with Nome looking at 17. Temperatures for south central and southwest will still stay on the mild side, but by the end of the week, conditions could be considerably cooler where you are. Lower 40s for southeast, close to 40 for the Aleutians, and St. Paul and St. George will be just above freezing. Let's move on to your aviation weather now. MVFR conditions at least are expected for the Arctic coast. I wouldn't be surprised to see some IFR across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast tomorrow, with the wind still staying up. That may be the case as we head toward the end of the week as well. You'll see some patchy IFR across the northern interior and across the areas in the middle Yukon Valley. Around Prince William Sound and the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula, MVFR starting to creep back into southeast throughout the day, probably heaviest around Chilkoot and White Pass earlier on. The southwest coast also looking at IFR, and you'll see some of that developing out across the western bearing ahead of that frontal boundary that's moving eastward. Let's check your pass conditions. AKwx Pass starting out at MVFR with some improvements possible during the day. We'll say the same thing about Adigan Pass, maybe improving toward VFR by the end of your Wednesday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see some improvements during the daytime as well. Probably worst in the morning and probably the best around 2 to 3 o'clock. Pass conditions in Rainy Pass should also be somewhat improved during your Wednesday, and as we get into Windy Pass, we'll probably start out at IFR. A better chance for snow showers in that region lasting into midday. Isabel Pass, we also expect to see some morning snow, but ceilings and visibility should improve throughout your day. Mentasta Pass, we'll call MVFR. Snow showers will be in the region, but they'll be a lot heavier to the west, so probably not as many problems in Mentasta. Tanita Pass, we'll see some improvements during the daytime, probably heading for VFR. Portage Pass, we expect to see IFR, especially in the morning, and maybe lifting toward MVFR if we can get some drier air in place. Chilkoot and White Pass will likely see a better chance of snow developing during the daytime. The snow levels today around the Juneau area were hovering around 1,200 to 1,500 feet, I believe, for tomorrow. So again, watch for some snow in those regions and perhaps a lowering of the visibility and distance there. So plan for IFR in the afternoon and hope for better. Here's a look at the freezing levels now, and you can see the surface freezing line hasn't moved much around the Gulf Coast, but it is sneaking northward once again with that low pressure system working in from the west. In the meantime, we've got warmer air aloft also trying to work in across the central Aleutians, and really warm air working over Haida Gwaii with freezing levels as high as 8,000 feet. Icing potential will hold around 4,000 feet up across the northern Yukon there. Some of that just kind of snaking its way into the upper Yukon Valley. Light to isolated moderate there. Also across the Yakutat area, the Wrangell St. Elias into eastern sections of Prince William Sound, also above 4,000 feet. And also across the eastern chain, around 3,000 feet and above. Most of that, again, is ahead of a disturbance. The better chance for any significant icing will probably be where the visibility is poor and you don't want to fly anyway up across the Arctic coast. The jet stream potential shows us that High pressure is in charge of the west coast, but things seem to be changing around a little bit more. We have a little bit more of a west to easterly push coming into the Bering Sea, and with that we're getting more and more of those surface weather systems kind of making their way across a little bit more frequently now. As that continues to happen, we'll see them drive in a better chance of snow probably across the north, but this system looks like it's starting to shift eastward in the upper atmosphere, and as that happens, the cold that's been locked up here and has been traveling up and over into the east coast will start to make it a little bit further south. So give it a little bit of time this week, but it looks like this pattern will allow more colder air into more parts of Alaska. At 9,000 feet, you see a south and westerly flow, wind speeds across the Seward Peninsula all the way down to south central, about 15 to 25 knots. A little bit of a stronger flow across the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast at 35 knots, and a south and westerly flow crossing through the central and eastern Gulf between 20 and 40 knots. A little bit stronger winds out across the west, and you see that reflected at 3,000 feet as well. 30 to 40 knots for the central and western chain. Winds are pretty light at this level, from about 5 to 10 knots or so from Norton Sound into Bristol Bay, and across Eagle and areas out toward Northway and Tok. Wind speeds are still from the south and west around 25 knots or so. You can get a little bit more of a northerly push across the Chukchi Sea with wind speeds as high as 20 knots for the Beaufort and as low as 5 knots across the Chukchi Sea. Your turbulence then, we're going to watch for some chop at least across the eastern and central Beaufort Seacoast, generally below 4,000 feet. And once again, the visibility shouldn't be great, and the ice potential will be there, and there's still blizzard conditions tonight. So flying weather up across the Arctic coast tomorrow is not looking so hot. Up across the interior, below 4,000 feet, you might run into some chop coming through some of the passes there surrounding the Fairbanks area and westward. And across the central and western parts of the chain below 4,000 feet, also watching for some chop as the pressure gradient's tightening up. Areas around the Dixon entrance and northward up toward, well, not quite to Wrangell, but to Cake and probably Craig, Klawock, and maybe into Ketchikan and Nanette. Probably a little bit of chop in that region. Overall, though, turbulence probably not the greatest factor in flying around Alaska tomorrow. Let's move on to your marine forecast, and we'll touch quickly on the sea surface temperatures. You can see this very deep purple kind of color is very close to St. Paul, but the ice edge is north of that. So conditions are ripe. If the winds would settle down, there could probably be some very quick growth of the ice there. That's not the problem. The problem has been the warm air rushing northward and chewing away the ice edge over waters that is primed and ready to go for ice growth. As you look at the sea ice edge as analyzed today, it's very close to Callaghan Island, across Cook Inlet. Across Bristol Bay, a lot of that ice has been eroded there, but there's still a little bit of ice up next to the shore, a little bit more as you get up into the Kuskokwim Bay. And there are some open leads there stretching from north of the Seward Peninsula around to the Chukchi Sea coast. It's pretty narrow bands there, but there are some open leads there. If you're in the Shishmaref area out toward Kivalina, you've probably seen some of that. Your marine weather now in southeast. Winds will stay pretty light with a south and easterly flow coming through the inner and outer coastlines there, about 15 to 20 knots on the inside, about the same on the outside. 6-foot seas on the outside and 2 to 3 foot seas in the north, 3 to 4 foot seas as you head further south across southeast. 10 to 20 knots there on the inside. Look for 2 to 4 foot seas as you get into Thursday. Winds continue to be fairly light with a south and easterly flow around 10 to 15 knots and seas holding at 6 to 7 feet for Thursday. So all in all, not too bad for the wind and waves as we get into southeast toward the midweek. Variable and light winds for most of south central tomorrow as well. A northeasterly flow inside of Prince William Sound. You usually can't buy that kind of weather. Northerlies around Shelikof Strait, 2 foot seas there. A little bit higher seas as you head east of Kodiak and east of the Barrens with 5 to 7 foot seas in the western Gulf. As you get into Thursday, the winds are shifting around a little bit, but as Ruben would say, no change. Not a whole lot to report. An easterly flow outside of Montague Island and Prince William Sound, 15 knots with a 6 foot sea. Otherwise, light and variable winds in the northern inlet and northwesterlies west of the Barrens, 10 knots. Across the Alaska Peninsula, light wind into Bristol Bay at 15 knots with a 3 foot sea. Also looking at light westerlies south of King Cove and Sand Point with an 8 foot sea. For Thursday, northwesterly winds 25 to 30 knots there, looking for 10 foot seas south of Sand Point and King Cove. 6 foot seas as you head up toward Castle Cape. Northwesterlies coming into the Bering Sea coast will bring seas up to 14 feet with a 30 knot wind. For Wednesday across the Aleutians, look for the strongest winds out in the west from Kiska to Attu. Strong gales there, 40 to 45 knots. 22 to 26 foot seas are expected there, and then those conditions rapidly diminish as you head eastward. 25 to as high as 35 knots with 8 to 17 foot seas in the Pacific and 9 to 16 foot seas on the Bering Sea coast. For Thursday, you'll notice the wind shifting a little bit more to the south and west across the central chain. Southerlies diminish across the western chain down to 40 knots there with 15 to 17 foot seas, and northwesterlies crossing the eastern chain at 35 knots with 13 to 18 foot seas. Now, as we get into the west coast, we'll see winds shifting around a little bit here as one system crosses through and interrupts the northern flow, and then the return flow comes back, and then colder air is also on the way. Easterlies crossing St. Lawrence Island at 20 knots. Look for southerlies in the St. Matthew Island waters with an 11-foot sea. Light winds coming into Kuskokwim Bay, and the Pribilofs will be under the influence of a southwesterly wind with a 9-foot sea. By Thursday, you can start to see that colder air dropping southward on the northerly flow. And that may advance some of the ice, as we just talked about. The water is certainly primed for that to happen. It's got to be less wind and certainly colder air coming over. Northerlies out of St. Matthew and St. Lawrence Island at 20 to 25 knots. We'll keep a westerly flow, though, strengthening across the Pribilofs with a 17-foot sea there. Now, across the Arctic coast, westerlies at 30 knots continue across the Beaufort Sea. Northerlies coming into Kotzebue Sound at 15 knots will continue for Wednesday. As we get into Thursday, winds diminish a little bit up across Point Barrow and the surrounding region. A northeasterly flow there at 15 knots. Northerlies coming down the west coast and into Kotzebue Sound at 20 knots. And westerlies diminish somewhat down to 20 knots for areas around Kaktovik and east of Dead Horse for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, presently under a blizzard warning right now. Here's a recap of tonight's weather. Colder air is rushing in across the Brooks Range and across the coastal plain and the Arctic coast itself. Blizzard warnings continue for the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Most of the North Slope is under a winter weather advisory for poor visibility tonight. There will be some falling snow in the northern areas of the Brooks Range as we head through the rest of tonight. Other places may see rain mixed with snow around South Central and around the Copper River Basin. A better chance for all snow there, though it still looks fairly mild. Low pressure will slosh more moisture for the rest of the week up around the Chugach and the Kenai Peninsula. Rain will slowly sneak eastward into southeast by the end of the week. Out across the west, another frontal boundary working toward the west coast will allow warmer air to work over the Alaska Peninsula and into Bristol Bay and the YK Delta as we head through Wednesday. Look for blowing and drifting snow to still be an issue across the Arctic coast as we head into Wednesday for the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast especially. A lot of the falling snow will trend downward and we'll get into a drier situation, but visibility may not be improved there. And snow is moving toward the interior, especially the central interior as we head into Wednesday and Thursday. We'll continue to see an opportunity for some light rain and snow across South Central, and you'll see improving conditions perhaps across the north. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.